Hello, everybody. Welcome into another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I am Ryan Wormeli, joined on this Tuesday morning by Andrew Erickson and by our guest, Theo Gremminger. Theo, thank you so much for making the time. It is a busy time of year for everybody. We really appreciate you coming on.
No, thanks for having me, guys. Really looking forward to talking about some of these wide receivers with you. It's a really fun week for us. Week 11, man. It's almost Thanksgiving. Ready to rock.
It's crazy how fast football season goes every single year.
I didn't believe, Joe had messaged me about like rescheduling one of our shows for Thanksgiving. I was like, wait, why are we rescheduling this? Like Thanksgiving's next week. I'm like,
yeah.
What?
Need to figure it out now.
Wasn't it just Halloween? And they're like, oh yeah, it's next week. So I was like, I was blown away. I was like, oh, okay.
As Theo mentioned, we are talking about some wide receivers here this morning. We're running through our buy lows and sell highs. But as always, we are starting with the most traded guys. And the most traded wide receiver right now in the last couple of days is actually Michael Pittman. Erickson, I want to start with you. Michael Pittman, are you buying, selling, or holding him right now?
I always buy wide receivers that are alphas. And Michael Pittman, straight alpha. You can't spell his name without the word alpha. But it's been on the field this year. He's just been so dominant when it comes to the target share, especially with Gardner Minshew as the quarterback. He's a screaming buy for me. He's consistently putting up numbers. He's clearly the number one receiver, and I love the Colts' schedule. Rest of the season's top 5 in the terms of strength of schedule for wide receivers the rest of the way. He's on a bye week. I think it's the perfect opportunity to kind of strike a deal for Michael Pittman because I think he's just so consistent with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. I just like this Colts offense, like with JT, with Josh Downs, who I think is also kind of an interesting buy low guy coming off of a knee injury where he didn't really play a lot. He should be healthy after the bye week. So I'm all aboard buying Colts players, especially with Pittman.
Pittman's wide receiver 17 in our expert consensus rest of season rankings. Do you think that's too high, too low, or just right, Erickson?
I'm checking right now where I have Pittman. I think I must have him higher than that. Or no, I have him wide receiver 17. So I think it's spot on. Yeah.
Theo, what do you think about that ranking? And also, are you buying, selling, or holding?
I would be a little bit higher than that. I mean, if people are treating him as wide receiver 17, I think that I'm going to be absolutely buying. Completely agree with Andrew. And Andrew came on my podcast a few weeks back, and we were talking up Michael Pittman in the same light. And nothing has really changed. He has a chance to set a career high in targets this year. This was an absolute bargain at ADP when you were drafting him this year in like the 7th, 8th round. It's been a perfect storm for him with Gardner Minshew behind center, and it's such a predictable target tree. It's a ton of Michael Pittman, some Josh Downs, and that's it. Maybe a little bit of JT out of the backfield. Pittman also was unlucky this past week. That was one of the weirdest plays that we've seen all year, that there was no review on that screen pass where it looked like he fell into the end zone and they called him down at the 1. I'm sure a lot of fantasy managers were just screaming at their TVs like I was, saying, give me my touchdown right there. But Michael Pittman, rest of the season, absolutely a buy. I think he finishes as a wide receiver 1, and I think he finishes the season strongly.
Nice. I love the optimism there. Wide receiver 1. It seems very reasonable, though. Like, it sounds aggressive, but I'm not sure how. It's not like crazy or anything like that. Let's run through some actual real life trades that have gone down in Fantasy Pros My Playbook. Again, these are real life trades. I want to get your guys' opinion on them. Theo, I'll start with you. Michael Pittman for Rachaad White.
Give me Michael Pittman. Even though I like Rachaad White, Rachaad White's an RB1 right now, but give me Michael Pittman.
Erickson, we've talked a lot about Rachaad White on this show. What do you think about that one, Pittman or White?
I think it goes down to team need. I think that you're always going to be giving up a better wide receiver for a running back just because you need. So I think it's a fair deal for teams. It's like, hey, I need a receiver, I need a running back. Let's make a deal. I think that's fair. In a vacuum, though, I would prefer Pittman.
Theo, how about if you need a tight end, Michael Pittman for Sam Laporta?
Oh, now you got two guys I really, really love. This is a very difficult one. Because of positional scarcity and because the tight end position is actually scoring more points this year, I feel like in order to win my fantasy league, I'm going to need big tight end production. So I'm going to lean Sam Laporta on that one, but it kind of hurts to say that I would trade Michael Pittman.
Erickson, if you need a tight end, are you making that deal?
I think so. I mean, Laporta's cooled off a little bit, but I mean, the Lions' schedule is so favorable for their offense to just keep on cooking, and he's been pretty consistent all year long. So if you're sick of, again, I think it's really key, especially in the fantasy postseason to have a tight end difference maker. That's why like George Kittle is so polarizing to me, because as bad as he is when he has these horrible games, when he explodes, like he wins you weeks. And that's just like terrifying to face in the fantasy playoffs. So I think if you want to give yourself the best chance of winning in the playoffs against a team that probably also has a very strong tight end, like you need to combat that with a guy like Laporta who can also put up a big game against some of these other teams that have tight ends that are going to be able to put up points. So I think that it's a fair trade. And if you need the tight end, I would probably make the move.
Last trade here, Theo. Michael Pittman and Ken Walker for Devon Achane and Amari Cooper. Again, that's Pittman and Walker for Achane and Cooper. What do you think about that one?
Give me the Achane side, because I think he's potentially the league winner. And I don't want to pass up the opportunity to get that sort of running back production. And I think Cooper's a good enough pivot from Pittman that I'm okay doing it.
Erickson, are you taking the same side?
Yeah, I think that, again, waxing poetic about Michael Pittman, Amari Cooper is still really solid. Like, he's still a solid receiver. I don't think the difference between Pittman and Cooper is going to be as vast as the difference that could be with Achane. So I like the Dolphins running back there.
Guys, we are well into November and the heart of football season, plus basketball and hockey are underway now too, and both college football and college basketball. There are so many games to watch on any given day, but wouldn't it be even better to be there live? The best way to get tickets to any of these games this month is on Game Time, the official ticketing app of FantasyPros Fantasy Football. Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you peace of mind with your purchase. They let you see the view from your seat before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Their all-in prices show your total up front, so you always know that you're getting a great deal, and it takes no time at all. You can buy tickets in just seconds with 2 taps. Download the Game Time app and redeem code FantasyPros for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the Game Time app and enter code FantasyPros, all one word, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Guys, I asked about Amari Cooper in that last trade. He actually is the next most traded guy at wide receiver. So I'll ask you both, and starting with you, Theo, buy, sell, or hold on Amari Cooper right now?
Amari Cooper for me is either a hold or a buy. I think that the last few weeks have been very promising for him. Even this past week against Baltimore, this was the kind of game where a lot of fantasy managers were saying, maybe I'm just going to bench my Browns. Difficult game. They're a dog, 6.5 point dog. They end up beating Baltimore. You have a 6-3 team with a lot to play for, and Amari Cooper is their most consistent player on offense. Gets 6 catches, 98 yards this past week. He's had against Arizona a fantastic game. There's a lot to like about Cooper, and I don't think that the trade market necessarily reflects his value. He saw the rise in ADP this summer, and then it's been kind of a cooling off period. I think he's back to kind of having the kind of production that drafters were betting on. I think down the stretch they're going to get that. So for me, I'm all about getting a couple of Cooper shares.
He's wide receiver 21 in the expert consensus rest of season rankings. I believe that's down 3 spots from where his ADP was. This is again in half PPR. So wide receiver 21, do you think that's too low then, Theo?
I think that's about right. Mid-level wide receiver 2, but also one that's consistently there that we can bank on getting there. It's less of like spike week Amari Cooper and more of like consistent Amari Cooper, which we like to see. You know what you're getting.
What do you think about this one, Erickson? Amari Cooper again, wide receiver 21. Are you buying, selling, or holding?
I'm probably going to be holding Amari Cooper. He's not someone that I like necessarily go out to try and buy, because I kind of know what he is. Like, I think that he's going to be like a top 15 guy, probably rest of the season. And you always want to buy him after he has a really bad game, because like those happen. So like this wouldn't be the time to buy him, because when he's slated to like tee up and just go absolutely nuclear, he usually doesn't. And then it's like vice versa, tough matchup, puts up 100 yards. So again, if he has a down game, that's kind of what I would go after him, because that's when a manager might get frustrated with him. But I have him wide receiver 20. I have him 3 spots behind Michael Pittman. So again, I talked about how I don't see like a massive difference. What I would say with Cooper though is I would try to move him for a guy that might have a higher ceiling, like a Zay Flowers, like a Tank Dell. So guys that are rookies where it's like, okay, maybe we haven't really seen the ceiling yet. Again, you're taking on more risk, going after those guys. But I think the Cooper floor is, again, if I want to shoot for upside, I think that's not Cooper necessarily. I think that some of these rookies, I think that's a deal you can probably get done, which is why I have Cooper 20, Tank Dell 19, Zay Flowers 18.
Well, I've got some would you trades here again. These are real life trades that have gone down that I want to get your opinions on. Theo, would you trade Amari Cooper for T. Higgins?
No, I'm holding Amari Cooper. I have worries about T. Higgins, injury, and the production has been better with Cooper this year as well.
Erickson, what do you think on that one? Cooper or Higgins?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of throwing the towel in on Higgins because he's been hurt all year. It's all been different injuries. He's a hamstring injury, lower body. That concerns me. And it's why take on all that risk when you could just keep playing Cooper? It's you're hoping T. Higgins just does what Cooper has done up to this point, and he's hurt. So I would probably stay the safe side with Cooper.
How about Amari Cooper and Dameon Pierce for Alvin Kamara, Theo?
Give me the Kamara side.
Erickson, do you agree?
Yeah, I'd probably take the running back in that situation, especially if I've been trying to start Pierce and I can get Kamara by moving. I would have to do that trade, even though I don't love Kamara necessarily. I think that the value is still too good for a running back with his workload schedule for Cooper and Dameon Pierce.
Last one here, Theo. Amari Cooper and Brian Robinson for Brandon Aiyuk.
I think that one would be kind of roster dependent because Brian Robinson has been very productive. But if in a vacuum, give me the Aiyuk side because I think Aiyuk is the more likely player to kind of win weeks for me down the stretch and potentially have the spike weeks that I need in the fantasy playoffs.
Erickson, again, that's Cooper and Brian Robinson for Brandon Aiyuk. What do you make of that one?
It's highway robbery if you get Aiyuk. Look, if Aiyuk got the volume that guys like Lamb, guys like Jefferson got, he would put up 150 yards every single week. I'm so convinced that Aiyuk could just be absolutely unstoppable. I'm pretty sure guys can't cover him anyway. He only had 3 targets last week and was still super productive. So I love Brandon Aiyuk. If one of these 49ers goes down the stretch, 49ers have one of the best schedules for the passing game with Purdy. Aiyuk could go absolutely nuclear. So I like Brandon Aiyuk in this deal by a lot.
Let's move to our buy low wide receiver segment. Theo, we'll start with you. Who's your top guy at the position?
For me, it's Jaylen Waddle, and I think he's kind of become the forgotten Miami Dolphin. This year, he's averaging his lowest points per game in his career, but it's still, about 13.8, 13.9 points per game. In his previous 2 seasons, he was a plus 15 point per game guy. And we just haven't really seen the kind of spike week production that we are used to from Waddle. Last year, he had 4 games with 20 points or more. This year, he has 1 of them. And I think that right now you can kind of potentially go out and get him because he had the poor game against the Kansas City Chiefs. He failed to get to 10 PPR points. That was just a tough game for the entire Miami Dolphins offense. You also have the narrative that right now it's Tyreek Hill, it's Devon Achane, and he's kind of the forgotten one. But I think Jaylen Waddle is just too good of a player that we're not going to have him see week winning fantasy numbers down the stretch. I think that the spike weeks are coming. We've got Tennessee coming up. We've got Washington coming up. These kind of games are the ones where you could see, Jaylen Waddle scored 30 points and look, he's on his way back. Last year, his scoring was a lot closer to Tyreek Hill. That ship has sailed. Tyreek Hill's the better wide receiver here. But if I have a chance to go out and get Jaylen Waddle and I'm paying low-end wide receiver 2 prices, I'm absolutely doing it. I think he's going to finish closer to wide receiver 15, wide receiver 14 than he is right now down in the low end wide receiver 2 land.
Yeah, I think you could definitely see him having a really strong next month here. I do just want to ask on the finish to his schedule, weeks 15 to 17. So the fantasy playoffs are the Jets, the Cowboys, and the Ravens. Those are 3 excellent pass defenses. Does that concern you at all if you're trading for Waddle?
It's funny because I think that there's a lot of this narrative with the Miami Dolphins offense in general is that the playoff schedule is going to get them. And I don't know, Andrew, last time we had a Baltimore-Miami game, they scored some points in that one. And I think that was one where I think we were really targeting that in like underdog this summer. For, hey, that's the one that's going to win everybody the money. We want that Miami Baltimore game stack. So, and is Mike McDaniel going to fail to deliver on Christmas Eve for us? I think that Cowboys Miami game is also going to turn into a shootout. I'm going to stay very optimistic that we get Baltimore, and the Baltimore and Dallas games are going to be higher scoring than people think. And I think they're going to be exciting games for us as fantasy managers. Although, on paper, that Dallas one is a little bit scary.
What do you think about those matchups end the season, Erickson?
Well, two of them are at home. So the Jets and Dallas are both at home. So you don't have to worry about like weather. Oh, it's in Miami. It's fine. So I get the Baltimore one's the only one that's like, okay, you could see it being a lower scoring game. Like that's totally possible. But you can also see like Lamar and Tua just are firing on all cylinders. So again, it's never going to be perfect. There's never like a schedule where it's like, oh, so perfect all the time. It's like betting on two good quarterbacks to have offenses. Because again, everyone, the AFC right now, everyone is in it. Like everyone's trying to make the playoffs. Everyone's trying to get this seeding. Like no one is really standing out above the rest in the AFC. It's just a mess. So I think that it's worth going after Waddle, especially because he just hasn't lived up to what he's usually going to do. And like before the playoffs, he has the Titans, the Commanders, like those are absolute smash spots for Jaylen Waddle. So maybe he doesn't do this week 17 kaboom, but he's a big reason why you get there in the first place, which is obviously half the battle when it comes to winning the fantasy football championship.
Time now for our favorite segment. It's the Uber Eats player we'd give up almost anything for. This week, that player is Erickson's buy low wide receiver, Marquise Brown. Erickson, what makes Brown such a great buy low candidate?
Because he put up the worst game of the season last week with Kyler Murray as his quarterback. I was totally shocked by that. I was like looking at the game logs. I'm like, he actually had his worst game of the year with Kyler Murray at quarterback. Like basically the thing that none of us thought could possibly happen because he's had bad Josh Dobbs, he had Clayton Tune, and yet somehow, some way, he had his worst game of the season against the Atlanta Falcons in Murray's first game back. Now, I just think that's kind of fluky. I mean, is Trey McBride going to get like 14 targets every single week? Like, probably not. He's a tight end. Like, that just doesn't necessarily happen. So, Marquise Brown got the first target in the game. He actually had five targets overall, but he had one wiped off due to a defensive pass interference call. So, Kyler Murray was still looking his way, but the matchup just wasn't there for him. We see these receivers all the time. They have bad games here and there. The sample size with Marquise Brown and Kyler Murray is way too big for me to buy into this one game as, oh, well, McBride is going to run circles around Marquise Brown all year. He's never going to get targeted again. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So, again, Marquise Brown, we talked about last week, is kind of like a buy low when I never really thought of him as that because, like, everyone knew Kyler Murray was coming back. Like, are you really buying low? Well, now that Kyler Murray came back, Marquise Brown was bad. Now I actually think you can buy low because it's that fear that maybe is in that manager's mind as like, oh, maybe I was wrong about Kyler and Marquise Brown having this connection. But I think they still do. You know, they've gone back obviously to Oklahoma last year. Marquise Brown was super productive. So especially when you look at the schedule, Houston, Rams, Steelers over the next 3 games, then the bye week, then it's 49ers, Bears, Eagles. Like we're talking about playoff schedule. What better matchup than Marquise Brown against the Philadelphia Eagles in the fantasy football championships? Like that's a matchup that you want to play receivers in, especially with Kyler Murray at quarterback. So I think Hollywood Brown is probably my favorite wide receiver buy low target.
Theo, Hollywood Brown is wide receiver 26 rest of the season in the ECR rankings. Is that too high, too low, or just right for you?
I think it might be a little bit low because they have had so much success together. You know, we talk about like the beginning of last season when DeAndre Hopkins was on suspension and Hollywood Brown was giving us, you know, top 6 wide receiver numbers as Kyler Murray's primary target. And I think that the Trey McBride, like he's not going away, but he's not going to get 9 targets every single week. And you also had Rondale Moore with a season high in targets and catches. I don't see that happening every single week. So Hollywood Brown is going to have some very, very good fantasy scoring with Kyler Murray. I expect him to have multiple like wide receiver 2 weeks coming up, and there's potential for spike weeks there. I was very intrigued by how Kyler Murray looked. The mobility is completely there, and I think that the optimism with the franchise and the aggressiveness with the offense is there too, where you're going to see. I kind of like all these Arizona guys as buys right now. I love that answer that was Andrew's buy. But I'm into Hollywood Brown right now.
Get food from your favorite restaurants, plus groceries and other essentials delivered straight to your front door with Uber Eats. This football season, stay planted on your couch and get anything, well, almost anything you need for game day by ordering on the Uber Eats app. Uber Eats, the official on-demand delivery partner of the NFL. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details. Theo, give me your top sell high wide receiver.
It's Adam Thielen. Adam Thielen right now is wide receiver 9 overall in points per game in PPR. And there's a lot of red flags right now. I think the offense is really struggling. We saw that in the Chicago game, especially. I know that Thielen ripped the team after about their effort. It seems like there's a lot of bad things going on with Carolina. I think the offense is not looking like it's improving at all. We also see some red flags with Thielen's recent production and his usage. The air yards, back-to-back games with air yards of less than 50 yards for him, whereas earlier in the season we were seeing Thielen put up ridiculous air yards. And it's really just a bet on him regressing. This has been, in the first half of the season, he was one of the best storylines in all of fantasy football. But now we're at the midway point. You're talking about a 33-year-old in a bottom 4 offense. Carolina's only averaging 17 points per game. So I would love to pivot off of Thielen and get a wide receiver in a better offense that maybe has scored less points this year, that I have optimism on them, giving me some explosive points. I do not want to rely on any Carolina Panthers down the stretch. And I also don't want to rely on a 33-year-old having his best season since 2018.
Apologies if I missed this, but where would you have him ranked rest of the season?
I would probably have him as a wide receiver 19. I think that sounds about right. I think that that's where he's going to end up. He's scored too many points that he's not going to finish as a wide receiver 2, but I think he's a wide receiver 2. And for the most, a couple of weeks ago, we're talking about he was wide receiver 3 overall, and now you're gradually starting to see it decline. I think when the season ends, he'll be right around wide receiver 20.
Erickson, who's your top sell high?
Chris Olave for the New Orleans Saints, because, again, put up a very productive game this past week. It was all with Jameis Winston at quarterback. The first target that Olave got was the play that Derek Carr got hurt on. This is the time you got to sell, because the connection between Olave and Derek Carr has just been non-existent all year long. Anyone that's owned Olave, it's obviously been super frustrating. He's getting all the air yards. He's getting a lot of targets. And I think that this is why it's a perfect time to sell high, because Michael Thomas is injured. Oh, Chris Olave is going to get more targets. It's no, he was already seeing all the targets anyway. He was already seeing a high target share in the offense. So Michael Thomas losing games or missing games is not really a factor in my analysis to sell Chris Olave high. It's the fact that his quarterback and him don't have chemistry together. And nothing was more apparent than last week when Winston came in and immediately started peppering Olave with targets. Olave's catching touchdowns. Everyone's celebrating and rejoicing. They're not going to go to Jameis Winston. The Saints are on a bye week this week, so I expect Derek Carr to clear the concussion protocol and come back. And that's why I think it's just the perfect time to sell high, because this is Olave's, I think this is his best game to date. He caught a touchdown. Obviously, I think he went over 100 yards. So for me, I think this is the time to cash out on Chris Olave, because I just don't want to go back to pulling my hair out with him getting overthrown by Derek Carr every single week like we have seen so far this season. So Chris Olave for me is a sell high.
It was his best game by fantasy points, not by yardage. He had 112 yards in week 1, 104 in week 3, just 94 this week, but with the touchdown to put him over the top to just 18 fantasy points and half PPR, but it was wide receiver 9 finish on the week. He's wide receiver 19 in the consensus rankings rest of the season. Do you think that's too high, too low, just right, Erickson?
I mean, I'm lower on him just because of, for the reasons I kind of laid out.
Yeah.
But based on where he is in the marketplace, that's appropriate for me. It's if I could trade Chris Olave for Michael Pittman, I would do that. I'd rather have Michael Pittman. He's clear alpha and has chemistry with his quarterback. I'd rather have Flowers. I'd rather have Tank Dell, these talented rookies that are breaking out all over the place. The thing about Olave that I was always concerned about was just the lack of just raw fantasy points. He checked off all the boxes as a rookie from an efficiency standpoint, but actual fantasy points like were non-existent from him. So that's why I was concerned. Derek Carr is obviously one of the worst quarterbacks in the red zone. That's another big thing too. And they obviously use Taysom Hill a lot there. I'd rather have Marquise Brown than Chris Olave. He's the clear number one, and he has chemistry with his quarterback. So that's why I think Olave, again, you don't need to sell him for nothing because he still has a lot to go off of. But I think that you can upgrade potentially or package him with someone else to really get a solid return for a lot of these guys that we've been talking about.
Quickly, Theo, where do you have Olave rest of season?
I think that, where you guys have him is about right. I think somewhere in that low end wide receiver 2 land, but I'm with Andrew. I think this is a great opportunity for you to pivot. I think there's going to be some frustrating weeks coming up with Derek Carr. And unless your league is like points per air yard, then I think it's a fine time to pivot. And it was very frustrating for Olave managers that like completely invisible with Carr, and then immediately they get that really nice touchdown catch, and that kind of sparked a little bit of a comeback there. So it's like, where is this all along? You're right. It's a chemistry thing. Completely agree with you on the Michael Pittman one. I think that's exactly the kind of trade that you can make as well.
I'd love to play in a points per air yards league someday, just to try it out. I've got some listener questions here from Twitter to wrap up the show. Question number 1, this actually included both Hollywood Brown and Christian Watson. We've already talked about Brown, so I'll just focus on Christian Watson. Are we dropping or holding Christian Watson after his atrocious performance in this guy's lineup? Theo, what do you think about Watson?
I mean, the idea of having to drop Watson is so depressing. He's a hold. I mean, he still got the targets, but it's been a nightmare season, an absolute nightmare.
Erickson, dropping or holding Watson?
I would try to hold him. And this is something like a bigger picture with the Green Bay Packers. I wrote about this in the fantasy forecast this week. The Packers have this really good schedule that's coming up for them overall for a lot of their players. Like the big issue with the Packers right now is like no one is stepping up. Like there's no one piece that's like stepping up in the offense. The target share is flat across the board, except for actually Christian Watson's getting the most targets, but he's just doing the least amount, with them. But the schedule is really good. So the way I see it is, if a Packers player were to go down, like one of these guys gets hurt, I really think that would open up a lot of opportunities for one of these other guys to step up and potentially have a monster end of season stretch. So that's why I really want to preach holding Packers players on your benches. Like, it's really hard any week to be like, oh yeah, start Dobbs, start Jaden Reed, start Luke Musgrave. Like, it's really hard to press the button on them, except Musgrave because he's just tight end. But a lot, like looking at the schedule, you have Chargers. That's a great matchup. Lions, Giants, Bucks, Panthers, Vikings. Like, that's a really good schedule offensively. And the thing is, like, that's why the Packers are so hard and polarizing, because it's not one guy that's really stepped up this season. But if there were an injury to happen to one of these guys, like, you would see the targets flow towards other players who are talented. Like, we know they have a lot of talent on their roster. So for those reasons, I would like try to hold on to Christian Watson, just because it just hasn't really cultivated anything. Maybe he's not healthy, but for those reasons, I'd like to try to hold him along with guys like Jaden Reed, like Romeo Dobbs. I want to try to hold these Packers if I can, even if I can't confidently start them, even though this week is a good matchup against the Chargers.
Next question is a dynasty one. This guy has Achane and Herbert coming off IR this week in a dynasty league. He needs to open up spots for them. Nobody wants to trade, so he's wondering who he should drop. He says he is set at his starting positions for quarterback, running back, and receiver. The 5 names he gave me, and I do think that this is obvious, a couple of them not to drop. The 5 names he asked me who he should drop, 2 of them, Zach Charbonnet, the Dallas or Cleveland defense. I guess there's defenses in this dynasty league. Zach Moss or Kyler Murray. Now, I'm thinking there's no way we can pick Charbonnet and Kyler Murray, so it's one of the defenses and Zach Moss, right, Theo?
Yeah, 100%. Drop one of the defenses or drop Zach Moss. That's interesting to roster 2 defenses on a dynasty league, so it seems kind of pretty obvious. You have Dallas defense, just drop Cleveland. It's pretty simple right there.
Yeah, Erickson, do you agree with that?
I think I'd rather drop Khalil Herbert. I mean, look, if we're talking dynasty here, Zach Moss is a free agent at the end of the year. He's going to get paid.
That's a great point.
Khalil Herbert is going to be a backup probably. So I get, like, he's the guy that was viewed as a starter. Spoiler, like, he's not getting his starting job back. Like, again, like, he could play and, like, it's going to be a gross committee, but Zach Moss, like, you can't start him, but JT goes down week 16 and you have Zach Moss, you're starting him as a top 10 running back that week. Is Khalil Herbert ever going to be positioned the rest of the season to ever be a top 10 running back? Probably not, especially with all the running backs they have. So again, agree on dropping the defense, but I would keep Zach Moss, especially with him hitting free agency next year. He could have more value than Khalil Herbert, who, I mean, basically has been a bust all season. You know, he was hurt. So yeah, that's what maybe that's a little contrarian, but I would want to keep Moss.
I like that. Moss is only 25 years old as well, so I think he's going to be appealing.
Second round pick. Yeah. He's got draft capital. Yeah. Like that's something Herbert doesn't have, so that hurts him.
Like that.
Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. Erickson, just quickly, of the defenses, are you also dropping Cleveland and keeping Dallas? Not that we really rank dynasty defenses, but...
yeah, I mean, I have to look at like the schedules more specifically because I would really be more focused on like this year in particular. I mean, it's a good problem to have, obviously, like between like both defenses because they're both elite. So I guess I'll just try to like figure out which one will hurt me less if someone else picks them up and plays them against me. Yeah. So I probably just look at that playoff schedule and probably make my decision based on that.
All right, quickly on this last question here. Can Puka Nacua, Calvin Ridley, or Deontay Johnson be trusted as weekly starts? I don't really see these three names as in the same category, but this is the question as it was asked. Can Puka Nacua, Calvin Ridley, or Deontay Johnson be trusted as weekly starts, Theo?
Yes, I trust Puka Nacua as a weekly start. Matt Stafford should be back. Kyron Williams is coming back. The offense is going to be like it was earlier in the season. Puka Nacua is fine to start every week. That's a champagne problem if you're worried about not starting Puka Nacua.
Erickson, what do you think? Maybe on those other two names, Ridley, Deontay Johnson.
I mean, Ridley's the only guy who can't start really like consistently. He's a boomer, but I mean, he's like, I mean, I hate to like throw this comp out there, but he's pretty much Gabe Davis at this point. Like he's got to become Gabe Davis, where it's like, yeah, he'll have a couple big games here and there, but he's not the focal point of the offense that is struggling right now. Like Trevor Lawrence is like not playing well, so. Again, he's going to have spike weeks. They've got some good matchups coming up, but he's really more matchup dependent. Whereas Puka, feel good about him, and Deontay gets targets. Like he's done that historically throughout his NFL career. So I feel even better about his floor week to week than Calvin Ridley, who is, again, just Gabe Davis South at this point.
We will get out of here on that one. Thank you again to Theo for making the time. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and watching today's show. For Theo and Erickson, I am Ryan Wormeli. We will see you again next time.